Hey guys, Choppadong here, and it was asked about finding hitters in good spots using some of the tools here at DFS Army and another tool outside of DFS Army. I wanted to show you briefly how I go about doing it, and this is one way of many. There are so many factors to look for. WOBA, ISO, hard contact, there's all sorts of strike zone analysis, barreled balls, all sorts of stuff that you can look at in finding guys that are hitting the ball hard and then finding the matchups that they're in. You want to find the weaker matchups because that increases the chances that the guy's going to perform. Makes sense, right? I mean, bad pitcher, good hitter. The good hitter should have a good day. Now, he doesn't always, of course. That's what frustrates us about baseball. It's not a highly predictive sport, but we're at least narrowing down some things that are putting us in the right places to maybe catch something that does go as planned. It's either that or it's bank on all the random stuff, and you can certainly do that too. We do that a lot in the MME stuff that we focus on. But in smaller pool stuff, cash games, league play, single entry, three max type stuff where you've got very, very limited choices, you have to get good at narrowing down the options. When the whole world is full of white noise, you have to get really, really good at just cutting down to just what you need to be looking at, and then only look at that. Any outside influence beyond that serves to confuse you as opposed to help you. So let's cut down to the very, very basics. I put out some bullet points of things that I look for in the MLB news or MLB room in answer to this question. I like WOBA and I like ISO, but I'm looking really more for a bad team pitching staff and a good offense facing it. I'm looking for top of the order type of hitters most of the time. Then I'm looking for, good numbers the past few games. I want a hitter who's doing well. I don't want someone who's ice cold. I'm not banking on his regression and snapping out of it. I'm banking on a hitter who's putting up some good numbers, continuing to do what he's doing because he's clearly onto something. And if he finds himself in a soft matchup, then that's a bonus, right? We've got a good hitter who's hitting well in a soft matchup. That's a good sign. And ownership is usually what finds that for us. When we look at ownership reports, then we can use that consensus approach of the industry ownership reports to help us find the obvious. And that cuts out a lot of our research time. I'm building cash game lineups strictly based on that. And those cash game lineups are a 20-9 record right now over the past 30 days, basically. And that's a really, really good thing. So, that's what we're looking for when it comes down to simplifying and making things easier. I mentioned Team Rankings, Research Station, and Domination Station, and you can really start to find some things. So let's kind of dive in. Let me show you how to maybe weed out some of the bad chalk and find some of those little bit lower owned spots that guys that are being missed. On a big slate like today, it's super easy to get things that are going a little bit overlooked because the ownership is really, really spread out. Nobody's going to really be more than 20-25% owned, even if they're in a smash spot, because there are just too many other options on the slate, and it weeds things down. But we can find some of those things that are in decent spots and then bank maybe a little bit on the volatility of the game or the randomness of the game to vault that decent spot into a smashing performance. And that's kind of what we like to do. And we sit back honestly and we wait our turn. It's just how we have to do it. It's like I'm sitting in a river fishing, like a trout stream in one of those stocked trout parks with 100 guys on the shoreline with me, and we don't know whose line is going to catch the fish. We just know that they're in the water right here in this bend in the river, and if we all throw our line out there, somebody's going to catch the fish. It sounds trivial, and it sounds like a waste, but this is baseball. This is largely what you're doing. You are throwing your line out there in the best fishing holes, and you're waiting your damn turn because we don't know exactly, is the fish after a red lure today or a green lure? Is he after live bait? Is he after a minnow? Is he after a crawfish? We don't know. So we're all throwing a variety of things out there and hoping that we find the thing that the fish wants. That is baseball DFS in a nutshell. And if you're a fisherman, you totally get that analogy. And if you're not, you probably think that I'm stupid and I'm wasting your time. So let's move on and talk about how big this slate is and where people might be going. I'm personally going to set the optimizer up for 20 lineups, 3 uniques, 20% randomness, 1 opposing hitter against my pitcher because it doesn't always use that. So I just allow it. That way it doesn't bog down and stop giving me lineups. I use a variety in these smaller type builds. I use a variety of stack formations, some 3x2, which also gives me some 3x3. It also gives me some 4x3. When the optimizer sees a stack of 3 and it likes a guy on the same team as a one-off, boom, it automatically becomes a 4-man stack. So the 4 by X often gives me 4 by 1s, 4 by 2s, 4 by 3s. The 4 by 3s can give me 4 by 4s. It's not strictly that for me because we don't know what optimizer is going to like in terms of the one-offs. And in a day when it really, really likes the New York Yankees and you only select 2 of those in your stack, it may give you another 2 one-offs for a complete 4 stack. That's how your cash game builds get a little bit heavy. And we have to watch that when we're building for cash. But in tournament stuff like this, we want to allow maximum flexibility. And I'll get down to the settings here in a minute, because I want to say, how did I find some of these teams, right? How did I narrow down some of these choices, especially when the optimizer does not have ownership in it yet? It can lead us a little bit blind, so we're going to have to come back and look at it a little bit later when the ownership does populate, just to make sure that what we're looking at, the consensus, that the industry sort of agrees. We want the industry to agree with a lot of what we're doing, not everything, but we want it to agree with a lot of what we're doing because it tells us that we're kind of on the right track. If we have a few things that are kind of going overlooked or going, off the radar, that's a good thing too, because that's what separates us. We don't need a lot of under-owned stuff. We don't need a lot of under the radar stuff. We just need just a little bit here and a little bit there. And that's what makes the difference between us winning and us losing usually. So I will go to a statistical site like a teamrankings.com. Why do I like this site? It just very easily shows the numbers, right? This is team offensive runs per game. So let's back up one shot here and let's go to team earned runs against per game. Why do I like this number? This shows me bad pitching staffs, right? Cincinnati's a bad pitching staff. They're allowing 5.5 runs per game. Now, they're not lately, so we have to be a little bit careful with Cincinnati. But Washington's a bad pitching staff at allowing almost 5 runs per game, and they are right on pace right now. Colorado maybe is pitching a little bit better. Kansas City's pitching worse, right? I'm not giving those bumps like, ooh, you're pitching worse, so I'm going to get excited about you. Or, ooh, you're pitching better, I'm going to avoid you. I'm staying largely, this is only like a 1-month sample size at this point, 2-month sample size. So these numbers are still pretty decent. They're pretty recent. And these are teams that are indicating to us they're bad pitching staffs. So what I'm looking for is their opponents today. Cincinnati is facing Toronto. So Toronto gets a boost, right? I wrote all these teams down. I wrote down, LA versus Philly, Tampa Bay versus Baltimore, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, so that I can see who they're playing. And I'm putting a check mark next to the Toronto Blue Jays for facing Cincinnati. And who's facing Washington today? Milwaukee Brewers. I'm putting a check mark next to Milwaukee Brewers. I'm putting a check mark next to the New York Mets out in Colorado. I'm putting a check mark next to Minnesota facing Kansas City, right? Seattle has climbed up this list recently. I mean, look, they're a 4 run per team now. They're pitching to 8 run. They're a bad pitching staff right now, so I'm attacking them. So I'll give a check mark to Boston. And I go down that list. And these are the teams that I've given check marks to. LA Dodgers, Philadelphia Phillies, Boston Red Sox, Toronto, Detroit, Cleveland, Minnesota, Milwaukee, Houston, Chicago Cubs, New York Yankees, New York Mets, and Colorado. Well, I didn't give a check mark Colorado because New York Mets actually are pitching fairly well. They're a top 10 pitching staff. That's not good for the Colorado Rockies. So I had to actually scratch that one out. So when I come down and go forward here one more shot to runs per game, I'm combining this. I like combined stats. That's where I come up with my K-score, W-score, ISO, WOBISO type stuff. Is I'm looking for these combined stats to point us in the right direction, put us on a sliding scale. If an offense like the LA Dodgers is scoring 5.5 runs per game and they're facing a good pitching staff, well, that's clearly going to suppress the LA Dodgers' ability to score runs most of the time. Not always. They can still hang 8 on anybody, but that's what's going to suppress their numbers most of the time. However, if they're facing a bad pitching staff like Cincinnati, they should explode most of the time. Now, there will be days they don't. They only score 2 runs or 3 runs, but there will be days when they do score 10 or 12. And that's obviously an indicator we want to be in that offense, stacking it when that day comes. We don't know when it's going to come. We just want to be there when it does. So we understand we're going to miss a lot with these techniques. We're just trying to narrow down to what makes a bunch of common sense and where we can just trust that our day will come. Now, LA Dodgers get a check mark. That gives the LA Dodgers 2 check marks because Philly had a bad pitching staff and LA is a great offense. So I circled them on my page. They're a key target today. I don't care if everybody sees it. They're going to be highly owned, man. I don't want to use them. Fine, don't use them. I'm using them. Why? Because the slate is so big that the ownerships are going to be rinsed down and watered down, and they're not going to be as highly owned as they should be for the matchup that they're in. So I'm going to be there. I'm going to take leverage on being over owned with LA in my own builds. Okay, and I'm just going to hope that LA has the day they should have. If they don't, well, I was wrong. But if they do, then I'm set up to take leverage on everybody else because everybody else is going to be getting cute. I don't want to play the chalk. Well, it's not that chalky today. There's too many games on the slate for it to be super chalk. So just play the best matchups. The best matchups of all good offenses, top 10 offenses. Here's your top 10 offenses. And the top 10 offenses that are facing bad pitching are the LA Dodgers, the Milwaukee Brewers. The Milwaukee Brewers are facing who? The Washington Nationals. And they're a good offense in their own right. And they're scoring right now, being that their 3-game average is a little bit above. And the New York Mets in Coors Field. They're a top 10 offense. And Coors Field, Colorado, was a bottom 10 pitching staff. So those 3 teams are the major teams. The others get a check mark, like the New York Yankees. They're not facing a bad pitching staff right now. It's either a good pitching staff or a middling pitching staff, but the Yankees offense is playing fairly well. So I went ahead and gave them a check mark for offense, right? Like I've got check marks for teams facing bad pitching. I've got check marks for teams scoring a lot of runs. And then when those two combine, they get a double check mark. And again, the double check marks are the Dodgers, the Brewers, and the New York Mets. So what did I do when I put all these teams into play? I came over to the domination station, and that's where I got these. Here's my main 3 teams, my double check mark teams. If I have 3 teams, I put a 40% max on them because that forces a third team into the mix. It forces the optimizer to use all 3 teams. It can only use the LA Dodgers at 40%. It can only use the New York Mets at 40%. And then for 20% of the remaining lineups, it has to use Milwaukee. Okay? So on the other side, though, I put about a 25% exposure because I wanted to use at least 4 of these teams. I randomly mix them together in these formations, of course, but it's going to randomly put LA with New York, LA with Toronto, LA with Chicago, LA with Boston. I don't know who it's going to come up with, but I know all of these teams are a single check mark team on my little piece of paper. From LA to Philly to Boston to Toronto, Detroit, Cleveland, Minnesota, Milwaukee, Houston, Chicago Cubs, New York Yankees, New York Mets, and even Colorado out in Coors, they all get checked back. Colorado should get checked because Colorado is scoring runs. So now I'm just going to let the optimizer build me 20, 30, 40 lineups. And it's going to find a lot of the top projected players, a lot of the top projected stacks, and it's going to mix and match. It's going to use the teams that I wanted it to. See, it didn't use Milwaukee or LA as much, but it did use a ton of Mets. And then it mixed and matched 2 or 3 lineups for each of these other teams. So Toronto might mix in with each of those teams one time, which would be absolutely great. But I've got, Chicago and Mets twice. And then everybody else is just one combo of each. So my lineups are very, very unique, very spread out, very different. This would be a perfect thing to throw into a 20 max tournament. Download the CSV, go dump it in. You're all stacked up. You're stacked up in a variety of formations that can work. And you don't have any duplicates necessarily. That's a good thing. How do we find those hitters? Well, we go into the research tab, and I didn't use any there, but I'm going to look at the trends tab. And I'm going to cut down, for example's sake, to just these 3. Of course, the server got lost. To just these 3 teams, Milwaukee, LA, and the Mets, the double checkmark teams. And then I was going to show you how I sort by 14-day WOBA and bring all these guys to the top. These might be guys I go back into the optimizer and boost and give adores and give likes and give whatever to bring them up to the top. I mean, look at some of the names. McCutchen, Renfroe, Betts, Guillorme, Nemo, Justin Turner's turned it on lately. These guys are trending well over the past 2 weeks. They're hitting for a high WOBA. WOBA is weighted on base average, which means that a double is worth more than a single, but getting on base is rewarded. So guys that are getting on base and guys that are getting on base with a little bit of power are going to produce high WOBAs. And those are the guys that we might accentuate in the domination station a little bit. But honestly, the projections should be doing that for us. So we're finding these teams that come together with, 2 of the Dodgers and a couple of the Brewers here. So we've got Tellez, Tyrone Taylor, Yelich, Colton Wong. If you want to swap out and put a McCutchen in there, be my guest because he's swinging a hot bat. But sometimes these other guys do come off. And you got a Freddie Freeman and a Trey Turner along with a Jose Ramirez who's hit. These lineups are going to be good. They're going to be fine. We just don't know which one of these 20 is going to go off. One of them might. One of them is going to be stronger than the other. And we just have to trust in the fact that we're playing a few lineups and we're putting our best foot out there. And literally, we're casting our fishing pole into the fishing hole and we're waiting for the fish to select our lure. That's all this is. Any more than that, and we're overthinking it. Hopefully that helps get you on the right track mentally and we'll see you at the top of the leaderboard.